Hi, my name is Mitch Goldstein, and welcome to How to Be a Design Student. So today I want to talk about grades. I think grades are actually extremely problematic, especially in art and design. So the thing with grades is you've got to remember that in Western cultures, we are in a culture of winning, right? Everything is sports and politics and whoever dies with the most toys wins and all this kind of toxic bullshit about winning. And so I think that we are sort of raised, especially in K through 12 to education, to sort of think that like an A means you like won the class. But I find, especially in creative fields like art and design, letter grades are just absolutely absurd to sum up an entire experience of a semester. I've said before, and I will say again, that art and design does not have a whole lot of fact in it. It's all sort of opinion. Any rules that are made can absolutely be broken in ways that are really interesting. So we just sit inside of this world of kind of gray area and ambiguity and unknown. And so quantitative data, where stuff is like absolutely right or absolutely wrong in order to calculate a GPA, I would argue is virtually impossible to find. And so a single letter for a class cannot possibly sum up the stops and starts, the discoveries, the sort of roads you went down that maybe didn't work but taught you something really interesting. Like none of those things can really happen with just like a simple correct or incorrect. And so I really do think that feedback is critically important. Feedback is kind of what the whole experience is about. You should be getting constant feedback as a student from both your teachers and especially from your peers. And so I hope if you are not talking to your peers about your work, you should be, because that's where a lot of feedback is going to come from. But I think that like a single letter to sort of sum up everything that happened in a semester is just inherently kind of asinine. There's really only like two groups of people who actually care about your grades. The first group is your parents, because your parents most likely are not artists and designers and therefore don't really like understand sort of what this looks like. They don't really understand how you can have a really intense critique and have a lot of things pointed out but still make something really good. Like they kind of don't get the mechanisms behind this, but they also understand that like an A is better than a B, and so on and so forth. So they can kind of really easily understand that. So grades are good to sort of communicate to them basically how you're doing. Again, in a very limited, problematic way, but regardless, that is something they can at least access. And the other group of people who really like grades is sort of the machine of academia. The institution likes grades for scholarships, for dean's lists, for merit aid and things like that. The single letter makes it really easy for the school to decide kind of who gets what. But I will tell you who absolutely does not care at all about your grades. Me and all of your other teachers. We actually don't care about your grades. I'll tell you a secret. The worst part of teaching is grading. I've never met an educator who says they really enjoy grading. Grading is horrible. I care, and I know your other teachers care, that you learn, hopefully, an enormous amount of stuff all the time. The letter doesn't really matter. We're not there to give you a letter. We're there to educate you. The other problem that I have with grades is that, especially in the arts, in my experience, grade inflation is just extremely common. It's kind of all over the place. I think that teachers think every student always wants an A. And because like what we are doing is so gray and ambiguous and open for interpretation, I think we tend to grade really easily. And I am absolutely as guilty of this as many, probably more guilty than most. And honestly, this is doing students a really big disservice. And that's another reason why I hate letter grades. I think it's sort of lying to the students, not in like a negative way, but just in a way to sort of help students kind of keep moving forward. I think that students actually really value getting the grade they earned versus just getting the A sort of regardless of what they've done. You have to remember students are in school to be better at this and to learn, not to just kind of hit a number. Having said that, in the moment, every student I know wants to get an A. So it's kind of like cuts both ways, basically. In the moment of the grade, they want the A, but later on, they might realize, oh, that actually didn't really give me a whole lot by just sort of getting handed this grade I maybe didn't necessarily earn. So I think grading becomes kind of a false measure of accomplishment or a false measure of the quality of your work. And that brings me to the next thing about grades, which is that you really should be making decisions not based on getting an A. And that's, I think, a really big problem with grading, is because there's this sort of very quantifiable goal. We sort of tend to work towards hitting that goal. You should be making decisions in your work based on what is best for the project itself. You should be making decisions based on what you think the project needs to move forward in a way that is exciting and interesting to you. But making decisions based on what you hope will get you a good grade means you're basically just caring about sort of an external entity versus yourself and versus what you are looking for in the work. So I think trying to get an A by making choices to get an A, by doing things you think the teacher will want to give you an A, you're kind of ignoring what you are getting out of the project. And I think that working for a grade, more than anything, means you become very risk avoidant. It means you make very safe and very conservative choices all the time. It means you kind of make sure you're staying right in the middle where you kind of know is a sort of safe place to be. And so I think that working for the grade and always working for the grade is a really fantastic way to get very stagnant and very safe and very predictable in your work. I really think you've got to work for making good work. You've got to make for learning something, for getting something out of the project. You've got to work for coming out of this class knowing more stuff than when you walked into it. Despite what it may appear like, you are really not trying to impress your teachers. You are actually trying to impress yourself. And I think when you work just for the grade, what you learn kind of goes away, and it really just becomes about making the teacher happy. So the really kind of overarching reason why I have such a big problem with letter grades is that, especially in education, while you are learning to do this, risk and failure are critically important parts of your education, and grading tends to not really reward failure, which makes a lot of sense. Now, I will be making probably many more videos about risk and failure because it is such a fundamentally important part of what we're doing here. But I want to just talk about kind of how that works with grades. So I can tell you personally, and I know a lot of my colleagues, we kind of put into your grading rubric a lot of risk and failure. So generally for me, my classes, I usually only grade the final thing, the actual outcome, the thing you make, as only 20% of your grade. And the other 80% is all sort of risk and process and things like that. And that's because I really believe that this is what's most important, is the process, and the outcome is kind of not really the point of your education. The outcome is when you're in professional practice, and that becomes much more important later after you graduate. But while you were in school, you were there to learn, and part of learning is taking risks, and part of taking risks is failing. And that is why 80% of my projects are graded on process and risk and not on the final kind of thing. So in my world, if you, especially as a student, you try something really risky, you sort of go down a road you're not sure is going to work, you get outside of your comfort zone, you sort of really go for it, and you experiment, and you learn a lot, but the thing kind of sucks at the end, the thing actually, the artifact you make crashes and burns a little bit, to me, that's an A. That is not a C or a D. And I think that's a really important point, and that is, again, part of why the mechanics of grades are so kind of difficult to deal with in art and design. And lastly, and this is what I will end with here, lastly, you've got to remember, if you're doing a 4-year BFA program, you are probably taking 3 studios a semester. Each studio, you're probably doing 3, 4, or 5 projects per class. So if you sort of do the math on that, you're going to do 100 projects at least in your sort of art and design education. So if you drop the ball on one of these, or you try something and it hits a brick wall and doesn't work, it's one little project out of 100 other, 99 or 100 other projects. It just doesn't matter that much. And the extremely minor hit your overall GPA might take is far outweighed by the benefits of what you're going to learn and where you're going to get to by taking risks and really going for it. So with that in mind, I just want you to remember that grades are almost like a mechanism of the institution more than a way to really talk about how you're doing. So please just keep that in mind, and I implore you once again to make decisions based on what the work needs, not on what your GPA wants. I hope this helps, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.